Well, hello everyone. So we're back, module 2 for our course, and the second very amazing book that we are going to do a deep dive into is Visible Learning for Literacy. And so you might be saying, okay, this class is about adolescent strategies for students with disabilities, right? So with the first book that you've read that covered so many different topics, and now this particular book, both are 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 rooted in special education pedagogy. So this is a different way of getting at the information that we know works, and what's good for students from a course categorical perspective. So what that means is that there are strategies and things that work for students with different characteristics. And what works for certain students with certain characteristics works for a larger group of students. So let me clarify. Um, there are students who have issues with cognition, memory, and and attention. Let's say, for example, so students who have some cognitive issues, some memory issues, some attention issues. There are characteristics of that we can see in students who have learning disabilities. There might be some of that we see in students who may have autism. And you're going to learn there may be some characteristics that we might see for students who are in poverty. There are some things that we need to know about the way that we teach, that when we are being extremely clear, when we are establishing a rapport, when we are using statements of agency, when we're using anticipation guides, when we're using mnemonics, all these different strategies. They work for a large segment of the population. So one of the things that I really wanted to point out as we talk about this particular book, in my work, I started off my career working with students in middle school, and students who were learning disabled, high functioning, students who had autism, students who were behavior disordered, and behavior disordered is the students that I worked with the most. Students with oppositional defiant disorder. I've worked with students who had mild cognitive issues in the mainstream classroom, teaching science, English, and social studies. Those are some really tough courses for certain students. And so working with those students, always we want to have really high quality teaching, right? So we all do that. And we also want to have really good procedures in classroom management. That is so important. Having that rapport with students is important as well. So as a content area person teaching students with disabilities, it is our part of our responsibility is to also help students with literacy. And I know science, social studies, ELA, yeah, to be expected. But all the content area people, we all are literacy people as well. And it's important to understand literacy. I know you probably took a course in literacy for your certification. And so this particular book, I think, is excellent because it's the research of what we've known in special education repackaged with Hattie's work in visible learning. So by reading this book, you're getting the literacy piece, but you're also getting a lot of special ed strategy that we've been using for years that we know works. For example, with the mnemonics, definitely to ignite memory is something that in special education we have used for decades. And there are many studies that have been done that show the high impact of that strategy for learning disabled students. So there are certain strategies that sound good and typical students could use, a lot of students could use, but for certain students, these strategies are like, I don't want to say magic, but they're essential. They really do help the students because they address a need that the student is atypical in. So their memory might be atypical. Their perception might be atypical. So although they're in class and they can see, they may not visually perceive a visual stimulation as everyone else, or auditorily may not hear things the same way as a typical person will. So if you think back to that very first course that you took, the characteristics of disability, and you think about perception, the five senses, the way that some students just perceive their environment is a very atypical. We're going to use that word. Is atypical. It's different. You may have seen a student who a truck goes by outside and they do this. Some students, when they're experiencing the environment, have a hard time walking from a carpet to a hardwood floor. Just the difference in texture. Some students, even with their clothing, certain things that they just can't wear. Like I said, I started off in middle school, and then I transitioned to elementary, and I taught K through 6, the elementary level, and resource room, where I became an expert in K through 6 curriculum, and with so many students of so many different disabilities and typical learners, and working with students who were in the integrative co-taught classroom, students in self-contained, all different levels in elementary. And it really helped so much. And I kind of wish I did it the other way around, like did elementary first. There are a lot of things that that we learn in elementary and helping students become to develop literacy. And those things really, of course, impact the students so that when they're in middle school and we're teaching content, some of us can see, okay, this is the strategy we need to do, but some of us are at a loss because we don't know, we don't understand, we don't know what that looks like. So this book is really great because it kind of fills you in and it clues you into broad stroke of literacy, but also some things that you can do. And some of these strategies will be things that you say, oh yes, I could use this. And some of it may not, but it helps you understand, okay, so maybe this is what the student needs. Okay, so if I understand that the student needs or is having a difficulty in a particular area, and this book is suggesting some strategies, maybe I could create something for the student to take home, have the student devise a game where they actually are doing the strategy, like making word cards or creating their own mnemonics. Those are things that are really important. I just want to mention also, there's something called the strategic intervention model, which its home is the University of Kansas. And they have curriculum materials, and they also have SIMS educators that do professional development. And they also have books. Some people, so in their work, it's a research work, they go over so many different strategies, note-taking strategies, self-questioning strategies. There are just a ton of them. The one that I worked closely with was writing strategy. So teaching students how to write paragraphs, the paragraph writing strategy. So there are a ton of these. And if you're interested, let me know, because we can explore that. But it's a lot of information. But with visible learning for literacy, it really gives a more broad stroke of the literacy areas that you need to look into and you need to be aware of. And so I thought this book was really, really great at doing that. Again, of trying not to do textbooks, because this way it's an easier read, it's more enjoyable read, and it's practical. And the researchers for this book are the same researchers that do those heavy textbooks. So this is good stuff. I did see the book online. Some places you could download it for free. But just starting off, I'm going to briefly go over the book. In the last opening video, I did takeaways. For this one, it's a chapter one. I'm just going to mention some highlights so that as you read, some things that I would like you to notice and to give you an extremely broad overview. And so I'm going to check, make sure that you're seeing what I'm seeing. So hold on, let's see. Just make sure. Okay, good. Okay, so we're seeing the same thing. Okay, so to begin with, a question: have you ever heard of or taught visible learning strategies? So I know that there are a lot of teachers that do understand how these work. This work is visible learning strategies, but with a little twist. Okay, so this book discusses instructional routines to be used at the surface level, then the deep levels for transfer or generalization. So one of the things that is really cool is that there are different strategies. Sometimes we need to work with students surface level, because there's certain surface level learning that they need, and then how to then be attuned and aware of when we should make switches. So we're trying to get them from surface level to deep level, and then to get that information in a way where they can transfer and make connections, and then generalize that information to all different content areas and all different types of concepts. So chapter one. So chapter one, in the very beginning, it starts off with every student deserves a great teacher. And it talks about that. And so the authors use a method of meta-analysis, which will be explained in detail, and they create an effect size. And so chapter one takes great care in explaining the science behind a meta-analysis and of the different strategies that they discuss. Teacher relations, self-questioning, anticipation guides, note-taking. They look at the effect size. How effective and how much impact do these strategies really have based on the research? And so they are suggesting that there are some strategies that have really high impact numbers, and some that have lower numbers. But that if a strategy has a lower number doesn't mean that it's not worth using, but it's to really, for us to really think about when and how we use a strategy, because all strategies need to be varied, and certain strategies work for certain things, and some strategies are not as effective, which you already know. So they're taking something that we already know and highlighting it, and also showing the science behind it. There are some strategies that we absolutely do not believe work, and so those have an impact size. And I like the way that they've used this because it's extremely important. So, for example, teacher relationships have a very high effect size. So there used to be this whole philosophy with teachers where the teacher-student relationship wasn't important. And teachers are, oh, these kids don't have to like me. They don't have this. They don't have to, okay, these kids do not have to be your friend, but you must establish a rapport, create a non-threatening classroom. There's so much research around that. In the last teacher exam that, well, because of COVID, it was ended. It was an attempt at a national exam for special educators. One of the biggest part at TPA, some of you may have taken it, and it because of COVID and the expense, it has been put to the sidelines for now. Two main pieces of that was about teacher establishing a rapport with students, especially students with disabilities. So when you think back to the last book that we read about the teacher types and classroom management and setting up the environment, and that's a big piece in the title of this course, setting up that environment. So we know that teacher relationships are high. It's effective. So how you as a teacher relate with your students is extremely important. So on page 17, please notice some of the things that teachers can do to develop positive relationships. And there's a quote: literacy learning can be enhanced when teachers communicate specific, relevant, and appropriate expectations for students. From there, teachers can design amazing learning environments. And I just wanted to read something from page 3, why it's so important for us to take note of literacy. And it says, we think that visible learning for literacy is important for several reasons. So these are the big reasons. 1, literacy is among the major antidotes for poverty. And we're going to read about poverty, our next book. But even in this book, this is what we know for sure, that it is an antidote for poverty. Our students have to graduate being literate. Not memorizing a lot of stuff, but being literate. And being literate and memorizing are two different things. And I know you know that. And so there used to be a time where even in social studies, one of the areas that I taught, that there was a lot of memorization. And it was like, well, why are we doing this? And so we made that shift, and then we did inquiries. And still, inquiries is still a great way of developing students to think, to analyze, to be critical, to write, right? So it's moving to literacy more than how it was perceived or taught in the past. Because we know that literacy is an important antidote for poverty. 2, literacy makes your life better. 3, literate people have more choices in their work and personal lives, leading to greater freedom. 4, literacy is great at teaching you how to think successively, that is, making meaning one step at a time to then build a story. 5, literacy soon becomes the currency of other learning. And that's why, as content area people, we still have a great stake in literacy, because students can't learn content if they don't get those literacy skills. And literacy skills also are interwoven into what we teach. In order for them to acquire that knowledge, they have to have literacy. So when they come to you, especially students with disabilities, there might be pieces in literacy that's the issue. I've had students, okay, so I have students with learning disabilities who cannot read. Amazing, amazing cognitive abilities. If you believe in IQ, and we're going to talk about IQ a little later on, can in their mind analyze things, but read at a 8th grade level, no, can't do it. So in science, what do? Because science is not, or it's every time you give a science test, are you giving a science test or are you giving a reading test? So these are some of the things that we have had this conversation in courses, and we've had it in legislation. This is why we have the accommodations, but it's just not enough to say, okay, I'm going to read the test to you. What is it that we do as teachers during the whole course as we're working with students, where we're conscious of the literacy skills and the content knowledge? There's a way that we have to bring that together. So when we're planning our lessons and we're thinking about that, and we're thinking about, okay, how do I take into consideration all these diverse needs? That is, we're differentiating. And that's why that's so important. As you're thinking and as you're planning, the literacy background piece needs to be there. The strategies need to be there because you will pull from them. So I would say definitely, please read this book, and it might lead you to great strategies and also other strategies that the book touches upon, but then you can go further into. And you might find one area in this book that for your particular content is something that you're, oh, I could use that. I really need to use it. Okay, so a little bit more about chapter 1. Towards the end of the chapter, you will have a clear understanding of how the authors define surface level, deep level, and transfer, and that teachers should include challenge, self-efficacy, and learning intentions with success criteria in all lessons. So in all lessons, there needs to be a success criteria to know if the students have achieved what it is they were supposed to in that 43, 45 minute session, or in the unit, other than just whether or not they did well on the unit exam. We don't wait that. Okay, so on page 34, there are some feedback strategies. Feedback is a great strategy, and the way that it is defined and used in this book and in other capacities, it's a basic strategy that we can hone and use it immediately to do great things. Okay, so chapter 2. So I have my book, and I'm just going to go to chapter 2. I have so many things highlighted in this book that I wanted to share with you, but you need to sit with the book and really read it, and you'll have those moments. So in chapter 2, we really take a deep dive into surface learning. Then you're going to learn about acquisition and consolidation. So how students acquire information and then how they consolidate it so that it becomes their own. And so things like repetition, practice, rehearsal, and feedback on the surface level is really important. And for some students, for many students, especially students with disabilities, acquisition is extremely important because research shows that rehearsal is something of a metacognitive skill that is intuitive for some students and totally not for others. And so for some students, if we use the information processing model of how we think, we get information, it comes in, into our sensory register. And then from there, we're thinking about the information, and then we'll start to rehearse it in our mind and make sense of it. And then we have an output. There are all types of problems that can happen in that model, especially for our students with disabilities. So the information is coming in. Remember, I was like how we perceive information. So student who has attention deficit disorder is paying attention to everything. So as you're speaking in your classroom, they hear the fan going, the car outside, somebody over there sneezing, somebody is talking to their friend in a whisper, somebody's writing something on a piece of paper. So now I'm all over the place. I'm paying attention to everything, and I'm not selecting you out. So you are on the same level as everything else, right? So right there, it's not, the information is not coming into the sensory register in the same typical way as it is for everyone else, right? So, and if you say, are you paying attention? The student, yeah, the student is paying attention. They're paying attention to everything, everything. Not so attention deficit, it is, some say, no, it's not a deficit. It's the opposite. It's paying attention to everything. So in that process, that could be a problem right at the beginning. And so when the information is coming in, how I'm processing the information and rehearsing. Some students are not rehearsing it. And some students can't, or they have difficulty with memorizing the pieces. That's why we do chunking and all those other pieces, or we connect it to prior knowledge somehow. So you're going to learn about acquisition and consolidation. And then as you continue, the chapter leverages prior knowledge and the use of anticipation guides. Direct instruction, which is a dirty word in some districts, but direct instruction is really powerful for certain information at the surface level. We need that information at the surface level. Sometimes, a lot of times, before we can get into that deep surface. Vocabulary instruction, mnemonics, word cards, modeling, word source, widening, context clues, annotating, and note-taking. So look at those. Is there any strategy here that you have not heard of or you don't know of? That's good. So as you're reading, you're going to learn more about those. And maybe one of these is a new strategy that you can add into your repertoire of skills in your classroom. Chapter 3. So we move from surface learning to deep learning. And so the chapter goes into concept mapping, and how we can use that. Discussions and questioning. Explaining metacognitive strategies, and then feedback to the learner as an additional strategy, reciprocal teaching. And let's take a quick look at page 75. So if you look at page 75, where it says, the problem lies not with surface learning per se, but rather with failing to move students to deeper literacy learning. But how? By equipping them with the tools and affording them the opportunity to do so. In this chapter, we'll be highlighting some of the types of teaching that will help provide students with these tools. So specifically on page 5, as we move from surface learning to deeper learning, how do I do that? How do I get them from the surface to deeper? So chapter 3 goes into that. And so towards the end, when they talk about feedback, really focus on how they distinguish. There's feedback about the task that you give to the students. There's feedback about the process, self-regulatory feedback, and feedback about the self. So using different types of feedback can be extremely important and helpful. So think about the last book we read, and some connections between the things you learned there and even here with types of feedback. Okay, chapter 4 in this book. I have it in front of me. And in chapter 4, you're going to learn what transfer is. So this is teaching literacy for transfer. There's a section called low road hugging and high road bridging, page 104. Take a look at that. And then you're going to learn about how transfer is expressed by some teachers, how they use that. One, Genius Hour, but actually the name was kind of changed to get students to actually work on something where they had an opportunity to develop that transfer. If you take a look at page 128, I'm going to go to it right now. There are 12 questions. Let's go to page 128. Okay, so on page 128, there is sort of a frame for teachers to help you think about how to cultivate curiosity and channel how classroom time is utilized to extend learning. So even like on the Molloy lesson plan, those of you who know it, there's a not independent practice, but I think it is an independent practice. So independent practice is at some levels, people think of that as homework, right? But there's also this notion of it when you have students who are done, and then everyone else is still working. How do you get those students to go deeper or move forward? And please, I have to say this on behalf of every student in America. If I'm quick and I do work and I finish fast, please don't give me more work. That is the same work. You're punishing me, punishing me, punishing me. I see that a lot in classrooms where students are quick, they finish, they're like, I'm done. And then the teacher just gives them more work. And so what does the student do? Instead of finishing quickly, they go really slow. And so now there's time where they could have gone deeper and they don't, because they know you're not taking them deeper. You're just giving me more work. So please, the students have asked me to say that to you. Please don't just give us the same work. I observed a teacher who had students doing a computation, and she had a sneaker, and it had different equations, and the students then could use laces on the sneaker. It was fun. It was, it was a fun type of a thing. And so when the students finished, those who finished quickly and accurately had a chance to fool around with the sneaker and do the laces and very advanced equations. So it was basically the equations were on one side of the sneaker and the answers was on the other. So they got to have the sneaker and they got to lace it with doing the equation and the answer. So again, they were deeper, more sophisticated problems that the student had to kind of really think about. But then they got the sneaker and they got to do it, and they thought it was great, and they wanted to do it. So it was really a great way for them to move forward, a manipulative, right? At the upper middle school, high school level. Usually we don't think about doing things like that because we're paper, pencil, or iPad driven. Hand tangibles, and even movement in class at that level. So a lot of times it's like, oh, students can't really move in middle school and high school because of the way the classrooms are set up. But all of those moving cards. So some teachers have like little index cards and some independent things where you're just moving cards on a wall. and all you need is an index card and tape. Those things really are engaging and help students. So the question mind frame for teachers are 128. I'm not going to read them because I'm trying to keep this video succinct. Chapter 5. Okay, so in chapter 5, for chapter 5, and chapter 5 is the last chapter. So I also teach assessment. And for me, chapter 5 is really about using assessment in the classroom and using assessment appropriately and using it well. And so determining impact. How do we determine impact? How do we know anything is happening? It's through assessment. Very important. You have to assess to know, is it working? Pre-post-test assessments. Response to intervention. Response to intervention really is all about student is struggling. Here is an intervention. Okay, let's measure. How is the student responding? I have been in education so long that I was in one of those first groups that went from the traditional child study teams that we used to have, and we brought into our district this new model, which was not called response to intervention, but basically that's what it was. And so now, instead of just talking about what the student can and can't do, and then determining, should we put in a referral for special education? Now we're like, okay, general ed has a responsibility. What is it that we can do to help the student? And as a group, what we would discuss, what's the strategy? Okay, let's try this strategy. Someone has to measure it. And the other thing that's so important, response to intervention, how it shifts the paradigm is, well, before you make the referral to special education, could you let us know what works and what doesn't work for the student? Because special education is not a place, it's not a room, but it's a set of services. How can we best serve the student? What is the services that they need? So also we have screening as a assessment measure, progress monitoring, and then supplemental intensive interventions, which in some cases relating to response intervention will be your tier 2, tier 3. I believe this chapter also goes into positive behavioral supports for everyone, but for students with disabilities, they may go through those interventions and need something intensive. However, it is important that school-wide, those students have interventions all along the way. So when we talk about environments, it is that inclusive environment that is conscious and has actual policies and pieces to help all students as they are moving through. In literacy, in behavior, there is something called the welcoming schools. And so that is a group that comes in and looks at how welcoming your school is. There are also other organizations that look at social emotional development in schools. It looks at virtues, values in schools. So there are a lot of different organizations that work school-wide to help cultivate the culture in the school to be an environment that is conducive for learning. So I think this is the last one. Yeah, so that was the last slide. So please, I hope you enjoy reading this book, sit with it, and then let's see here. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. Sit with it, and then there will be office hours. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, you can come to the office hours. And if there's something in the book that you want to discuss, I'm up to that too. So thank you. And I am going to end this. I always have difficulties with this point. All right, thank you. And until we meet again, I look forward to reading your responses on in Canvas, and enjoy.